Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to another installment in the Red Shadow's favorite games. I am the Red Shadow, and today I am here to talk about a game that unfortunately don't have a physical copy to show off to you, and it's very, very sad. But that game is my favorite Super Nintendo game, Super Metroid. I give this just the slightest edge over The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I think I have a lot more fun just jumping into Super Metroid and playing it, whether I beat it or just play around for a little while. I find it a little more accessible than Link to the Past is. But, Super Metroid. I love Super Metroid. It's hard to even quantify just how much I enjoyed that game. So many great games on the Super Nintendo back in the early 90s when I owned mine. Donkey Kong Country games, the Zelda game. I always have fond memories of the Star Wars games that I played on that. The Shadowrun game for the Super Nintendo. Chrono Trigger. Wow. Super Mario RPG. All great games. I'm sure at least Link to the Past is going to probably make its way onto this list. But Super Metroid is definitely my favorite of all the Super Nintendo games. I don't really remember how I first came in contact with Super Metroid. I don't remember if that was one of those looked interesting on the shelf at the rental store, so I picked it up to rent it. I don't remember if it was one of my friends at the time who all had Super Nintendos. Maybe one of them was playing it and brought it over one time and said, "Hey, check this out." Sadly, I can't say just exactly who or why I first got into Super Metroid, but once I did, I was hooked. Everything about it, just the moody music. Music to me is very important in a video game. The music kind of sets the tone for everything about it. And this game was moody, dark, atmospheric for a 16-bit game, for a basically side-scrolling platformer style game with shooting elements and all that. It was very dark and atmospheric, and I really enjoyed that. I didn't play the original Metroid. I think it's been stated by me before. I didn't take part in the Nintendo generation, so I didn't play the original Metroid game. And when I look at that game and I try to compare it to Super Metroid, I find it's very dated and very just unappealing to me. To be honest with you, the only Metroid games I've really enjoyed since Super Metroid were like Zero Mission for the Game Boy Advance, and there was another one that it's escaped my mind, but there was another Game Boy Advance game. I had two that I really enjoyed, and then I'm not a super big fan of those GameCube Metroid games because I don't like the fact that they decided to change them into first-person shooter games. I don't think that captures the essence of what Super Metroid was all about. I own a few of them. I'll pick them up because I know that they are, somewhat sought after, and they are popular with some. So they're a kind of game that's probably going to go up in value, especially that ever-elusive Metroid Prime trilogy for the Wii. But I'm not a big fan of the Metroid Prime games. Would love to see somebody do something a little modern, like a modern take on Super Metroid. Maybe even an HD remake or something like that. Something that could say, "Hey, this is new," but still side-scrolling, platforming, awesomeness that is Super Metroid. Most of my stories for Super Metroid come from the late 90s, mid to late 90s, when my friends and I in Montana would play that game a lot. and especially my one friend John. He was probably even more so obsessed with getting 100% or whatever the percentage would be on that said that you picked up every missile pack, every weapon pack that was in the game. I like to get a lot of them, but I wasn't super obsessive. There were a few that I just could not do, and I'm not one of those guys who can just keep trying and trying and trying and trying ad nauseum until I would be sick and tired of playing the game if I did that. If I can't get it after a few tries, move on. I can live with it. I did try my hand a few times at, what do they call it, sequence breaking in that game. Like, for example, one of them that I remember is freezing these little guys that float along. They kind of look like they have a shell, and they're floating, and they go back and forth. If you do it just right, you can freeze a few of them and jump over and get into an area that you're not intended to be in at that point in the game. I actually find myself quite fascinated with the sequence breaking concept in Super Metroid. Maybe not so much in a lot of those older games, but Super Metroid was one that I thought it would be kind of fun to see if I couldn't get to certain parts of the game much sooner than you're supposed to, or how quickly I could beat the game overall. But, man, as I mentioned in the beginning, I don't have a copy of it to show. I don't own a Super Nintendo right now. I briefly entertained the thought about 2 months ago taking tax money and buying a Super Nintendo and actually tracking down cartridge games, kind of like I sort of have with my Nintendo 64 collection. But I have a Wii. I have the red Wii. It's backwards compatible with GameCube, and a friend of mine showed me how to do the homebrew on it so that I can basically get older games. I don't want to talk too much about it. I don't know about the legalities of all that, and lots of people talk about, don't say things about that in certain places on the internet. So I'm not going to say anything more to it, but that's how I get my access to it, is through my homebrew on my Wii. But someday perhaps I will. I don't know. A lot of the cartridge stuff, especially Nintendo consoles, a lot of those big Nintendo properties that were super popular, it's really, really hard to find those games without paying a pretty penny. I don't care about having a box and a manual and all of that for what I would call common or typical games, but on something like Super Metroid, being that it's one of my favorite games of all time, I want a box, I want an instruction manual, and I want a nice, good, clean cartridge, and maybe even with one of those plastic cart protectors on the end. And I don't think I'm going to be getting away paying $20 or $30 for something like that. So that will just have to, that'll just kind of have to hang out there for a while, and I'll decide at another point whether or not I ever want to collect Super Nintendo games again and have a console, Super Nintendo console. But if I did, you can be very, very well assured that Super Metroid would be at the top of my list of games to pick up for that. So yeah, that's today's installment of the Red Shell's favorite games, Super Metroid. Definitely can say now unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, Super Metroid is my favorite Super Nintendo game. Games like Link to the Past and the Donkey Kong Country series and Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, and several others could fill out a nice top 10 list, but Super Metroid stands at the top. The Adventures of Samus, hopefully I'm saying her name right, because I like Samus. I wouldn't want to call her Seamus or Samus or something like that. But the Adventures of Samus, to me, are some of my best memories of early to mid-90s gaming, before CD-ROM based systems came out, before the 3D technology, 32 and 64 bits. Super Metroid, I don't know how a person could go wrong with that. A very interesting story. That music is unbelievable. The level design is fine. It's the look and feel of the levels that are really good. makes you feel like you are there, and it gives a very distinct look, whether it's an underground base, a spaceship that's wrecked, whatever the case may be. I just can't think of a better example of a game done right back in the 16-bit era. So I hope you enjoyed. If you ever get a chance to check out Super Metroid in some shape or form, do it. And stay tuned tomorrow for the next game in this series. Thanks a lot for watching.